Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. I am going to be making this dress here by Armand Mehidri. I will link their Instagram account below so you can see where I got this image from, but I've just printed it out so I have this as a reference that I can always look back to. And I've got all of my fabrics laid out on the table here, so I thought before we get into the actual making of it, I will go through some of the fabrics that I will be using. So starting with the bodice, which is the dark blue one, I've got a few different blue fabrics. The first one is a cotton drill fabric. It is very durable, sturdy, and I will basically be using this as the interfacing for the bodice, so like the structural layer to really help keep its shape. So that will be for that. And then I also have these two blue fabrics. So the first one is this, and the other one is this one here. So these were both from the Nest, I believe. This one certainly was. As you can tell, it's $8 for this roll of remnant fabric. So this one here on the left is, I feel like it's some sort of upholstery fabric because it's quite thick. It's not stretchy at all, and it has this felt sort of backing. And I got these two blue fabrics because they've got the same sort of stripy texture in it, and I thought they would work really well together. This one's just a bit darker than this one here. So the darker fabric will be used for the outside of the bodice, and then the lighter blue fabric for the sleeves. So those are the two blue fabrics. Now moving on to this like maybe grayish cream fabric in the middle there, I have got this one from, I think I got this from the Nest also. I don't know how to describe it, but it is some sort of knit jersey, stretchy, slinky fabric, and it's got quite a bit of weight and drape to it. Over the top of that for the bodice, I bought this beautiful trim from Saplings Textiles, and it is so gorgeous. And to complete it along the top, I have this yellow one also bought from Saplings Textiles. So that will be the middle of the bodice and that little top part. What else? What else? What else? For the red cape, I already have one from my Red Riding Hood cosplay. And then I think the only other fabric to call out is this yellow one here, which will be for the main body of the skirt. And I picked this yellow because it not only best matches this yellow trim, but it also has a really nice texture to it. I don't want anything too flat. Like I didn't want to get a plain satin or anything like that. So this is what I have chosen, and I hope it will work nicely with the rest of the project. And then I just have some red fabrics, various red fabrics from other projects, which I think I can try and use for the sleeve decorations there. So as usual, for my pattern, I'm using Nikita Cosplay's Self-Made Princess pattern, and I have started cutting out the pieces on my cotton drill fabric. So that's what I have here, and I will repeat the same process for some of my outer fabrics, being the blue and the cream fabric as well. Okay, so I've cut out my pieces from all of my fashion fabric. So for the center front, I have this cream beige fabric, and then for all the other pieces, I've cut it out of this dark blue textured upholstery fabric. So all of my pieces are there. One thing I do want to mention is that with this trim, this is going along the center front. So I have laid it against my center front piece like this. And because this is only so wide, I just trimmed off the excess of the curve on this front piece, just so I can have this go across the whole width of the piece. I don't think it will matter too much that I've cut off maybe like 1 centimeter along here, because the pattern, I've used this pattern a lot and there's a lot of room in the bust, and because this is quite, it's very compressed, I think this will work fine. So that was just one minor thing that I did to alter the pattern compared to other times that I've used this pattern. Okay, so we're starting with the center front pieces, And I have the blue pieces here, which are used as the structural layer, and then the beige pieces under here, which are the fashion layer fabrics. So I'm just going to lay them out on top of their corresponding pieces, but I'm going to start with this and sew them together down the center front. And I'm also going to work in this trim as well, because I think it would just be easier to sew as I'm putting this together rather than sew the bodice together and then try and put the trim on top, which would involve hand sewing, which I am trying to avoid. But first, let me go iron these pieces. Okay, so they're all nice and ironed now. And on this trim, I'm just pulling out like the seam allowance edge, and I'm going to lay that on top of the piece here, and I'm going to clip those together. And basically I'm just going to sew along this edge to keep these pieces together, and then likewise on this side. So let me quickly do that and you can see what I mean. So while I was doing up this piece here, the ones with the trim on, I decided that I actually need lining. So I have gotten out this old bed sheet from a previous project, actually from the Susan dress, and I'm going to use these pieces as my pattern to cut out my lining. So I've just cut out the center front piece, so that's what that is, and then I will do these, and that will make sure that I have lining to add the boning channels to. Okay, so I have all of my lining pieces here, and those are the structural and fashion layer pieces. So that's where we're at, and now I will go back to doing the two front pieces with the trim. So I've got my two front pieces here, and they have been basted together with all of the layers, the dark blue, the cream, and then the trim layer on top. So the next thing I'm going to do is literally sew them right sides together all the way down the center front. Okay, so I have sewn these two pieces together. I've also ironed the seam allowance flat, and it is looking really good. I also have this like string trim thing, which is just white with a bit of gold arrows throughout, and I'm thinking of sewing that directly to the center, so one on each side of the seam, and that will just give a little bit of extra detail, like in the reference where there is a line down the center of the bodice. Obviously there will be this yellow trim across the top. I'm not sure if I want it to be facing downwards or if I want it to be facing upwards. I think I do like the upwards effect because it's like little flowers growing up. And then the next part will be to add the blue panels on the sides. So these are the fashion layer and the structural layer underneath. I will be sewing those to either side, and this is looking really good so far. So very excited to get this going. All right, so I've finished sewing the whole fashion layer of the bodice. So all of the pieces have been sewn together and the seam allowance trimmed and all the seam allowance ironed flat to one side, so towards the back. So this is how it's looking like. and I'm very pleased with how this is looking. I am a little bit disappointed in myself because I managed to mess up pieces like the side front and side back pieces. So this is actually supposed to be on that side and that's supposed to be on that side as well, and vice versa. And also the back panel piece, I have also somehow messed up. This is actually supposed to be on that side and vice versa again. So a little bit frustrated that that's happened, but I don't think it should change how it sits on my body too much because I will be wearing this on top of a corset. So because I made those mistakes, I also repeated those mistakes on the lining fabric. So like I said, this is the bedsheet cotton fabric that I had left over. I've sewn all the pieces together the exact same way that I did the fashion layer, and I've ironed open all of the seam allowances so I can add my boning. So I've got my boning here. I've got a mix of straight and spiral steel boning, and I think that's what I'll be using because it's going over the top of a corset anyway. So I just need something to help with the shape, but it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be super strong boning. So this stuff is quite flexible, so it can bend over the corset, which is already quite rigid. It's the next day now and I've jumped ahead a little bit with progressing on this bodice. I just wanted to get so much of it done last night, so I did it when I had a bit of free time in between cooking dinner, and this is how it is looking at the moment. So really all I did was sew all the way around the edges, trimmed the seam allowance, clipped it at the corners, so the corners up here, and then also the underarm seams, turned it right side out, did a top stitch all the way around to hold that in place, and inserted the boning from down here, closed off the boning channels. You can see that this boning for the center is closed off here, so all here is flexible, and I closed off the boning channels by sewing all the way around, and then I zigzag stitched the raw edges, and then I have just turned them under so there is a nice finish on the outside. And just overnight I've had these clips holding this in place, so what I will do is I'll press this under the iron to help with the shaping of this and keeping it towards the lining of the bodice, but I might also just go ahead and do a top stitch all the way around the bottom edge of this bodice to help with keeping that nice and flat. And that is essentially the bodice done then. I just need to insert some eyelets in the back, so the eyelets will be going right alongside the boning here. And I do also need to make a modesty panel because this bodice is a bit small for me, which is fine because that's what the modesty panel is for, but I also will be wearing it on top of a corset, so I haven't actually tried that yet. All right, so I've now ironed and top stitched all along the bottom edge of the bodice, and this is how it's looking. Towards the front here, it's just too thick to fit underneath my machine, so I will just have to hand sew those raw edges underneath. But this is how it's looking like from the inside, which I'm I'm happy to leave it like this, but if at a later stage I feel like I want to cover up that raw edge, I'll just use some bias binding like this, and I'll just hand sew that all along the edge to hide the raw edges and help keep all of that contained to make this more durable for the long run. So very happy with that. I will show you what it looks like on my body. All right, so this is the bodice from the outside. This is the lining on the inside. Not perfect, there are some puckers in there, but I am pretty happy with it. And this is what it looks like on. So there's some room in the edges here to fit the skirt under, and I'm thinking the skirt will have hooks and bars to hook onto the bodice to help keep the skirt up and stop it from separating too much. But yes, very happy with how this is looking.